If you can nail two macros, but the third one is always off, if you're hitting your calories but not seeing progress, if you feel guilty eating out and want to make up for it the next day, you're making one of the 5 macro mistakes that I see every single week. And in this episode, I'm breaking down exactly what's happening and why it's not working and exactly how to fix them. Let's get into it. All right, so let's talk about the first one. I hit my calories every week, but went over on my macros. Is that okay? Okay, so what they mean by this is that they're within their calorie range, but their macros may be all over the place. So maybe instead of hitting their prescribed protein and carbs and fat, they're way under on fat, but way over on carbs, and way under on protein, and it's all mixed up. So basically what they're doing is they're just focused on calories, but not considering the macros that they need. So if you are someone who's just trying to get healthy, or you have maybe a lot of weight to lose, then I think that's a great place to start. However, if you're someone who's going from healthy to fit, and you really want to make sure you're building or maintaining muscle mass, and you're really fueling your workouts and overall feeling like really well fed throughout the day, then you really want to switch from calories to hitting your macros. It's just way more fine tuned to make sure you're getting in enough protein that your body needs to maintain or build muscle mass, making sure you're getting in enough carbs to intentionally fuel those workouts and recover from your training sessions, and generally making sure you're not overeating in fats, but you're still getting enough in, but not overeating in fat, so you have room for the other two. So when I prescribe macros to my clients, they are very intentional. And so are there times and moments where maybe just sticking with protein and seeing how carbs and fat shake out while you're hitting your calories? Is that okay? There may be times, like if you're just maintaining that may work for a short period of time, but if you're really trying to see change and make change, it's going to be much more optimal to really fine tune with macros. So that is mistake number 1 I see. Mistake number 2 is kind of along the same lines, but slightly different and flipped, where they say, I'm hit my macros, but I'm over on my calories. Like, is that okay? And so the reason why this is an issue is because your macros should always equal or be really, really close to your calories, because it's just the math. So if you took calories and you double click down on them, it's going to equate to macros, because every 1 gram of protein and carbs equals 4 calories, and every 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. So just with that simple math, if you hit your macros, you're always going to hit your calories. Now, the reason why this doesn't happen occasionally is because there are some things that are not considered a nutrient-dense macro. Those things are going to be alcohol, and they're going to be things like fake sugars, so like sugar alcohols. So if you have something like, let's say, like a lot of older school protein bars are going to have those sugar alcohols in them, and so those may not show up on your macros, but they'll show up on calories, or vice versa. Or it's, let's say you're having alcohol, but you're just tracking it as alcohol, then it's going to show up as calories and not macros. So the other reason I see this happen is because you're using a tracking app that is just not accurate. I used to run into this problem all the time back in the day when I used MyFitnessPal, because they were just user data, and so people would put it in wrong, and then I'd use that entry, where now I use something like Chronometer, where every single one is verified. I think overall apps have gotten better at this, but I still see this show up all the time for my clients. Another one, especially if they're not using something like Chronometer. The other one is something that has a lot of net carbs and really is pushing like the net carbs. Generally, there's a reason why you still wouldn't want to have that. And so a lot of times I've had people be like, oh, I have this tortilla that it says it's like super low carb tortilla, so I went with it. But really, it just has a bunch of additives and things in it that still count as calories, but not as carbs. So it's really when you're having a lot of processed food, or you're having alcohol, that this is what gets messed up, or you're just using maybe a wrong entry. So what I suggest is, going into your app and finding what's causing this. So what I do is just like do an audit of going over like the foods that I think might be causing it, and I just do the math and I do, okay, if the protein and the carb times 4 plus the fat times 9, does that equal the calories it's saying? And if not, I know it's wrong, and then I figure out why. And then I either don't use that entry and find a correct one, or note it and just track it differently, or just generally just remove it because typically I may not be needing that food anyway. All right, number 3. The third mistake that I tend to see is I can hit 1 or 2 macros within range, but I'm always way off on the third. So this usually happens if you are not pre-planning your macros and you're kind of just willy-nilly throughout the day and just kind of guessing. And then at the end of the day, you're like, oh my gosh, I have 100 grams of protein left, but then I'm over on my fat, or I hit my carbs. And so generally, if you're tracking as you go and you aren't familiar with a daily structure or how it really works, then this is typically like a newbie mistake, just because you haven't learned how to really be intentional with setting up your daily structure to hit your macros. So this is a super easy fix. All you have to do here is you're just going to take your macros and you're going to divide it by how many times you're eating per day. So if your goal is 120 grams of protein per day and you're eating 4 times per day, 120 divided by 4 is 30. So then you know that you need to get 30 grams of protein at each meal. You know, if you don't get 30 grams of protein at each meal, you're going to have way left over at the end of the day. So step 1 is to do that with each of your macros. And then step 2 is to just plan ahead to feel actually out your meal plan and what you're going to eat ahead of time to ensure that you will hit those macros. Now, do this initially, but then once you have the skill of understanding macros, you don't have to do this every single time, but definitely at the beginning, because if not, you're never going to learn food and learn macros. So that way you can eventually basically not track macros, but still hit your macros. So that's where I see a lot of my ladies get to once they learn macros first. And so this is what I would suggest doing. And I do a lot of coaching on this within Create Your Shape to really learn food. So it's not something you're not tied to tracking long term. All right. Number 4. I'm crushing it during the week, but on the weekends or social events, that's when I get derailed. So what's happening here is that you're just not considering that you're gonna want tasty food or you're gonna want treats beforehand. Or what's happening is you're getting too tempted in the moment. So what I mean by this and what the fix would be is 1, plan ahead of time that you are going to want delicious or food or treats. So let's say you have a baby shower over the weekend or you're going to the fair over the weekend. Then on Saturday, you know, okay, I'm going to the fair. I'm going to want XYZ food, whatever food you get at the fair, cotton candy or whatever it may be. And consider that like, okay, I'm going to want to have that, and then just plan it into your day. So then you're going to need to remove something else, but that's not a problem because you've thought of it ahead of time, and then you can actually enjoy that food. The other thing that I see that happens is you just feel tempted, and like when in the moment you're like, oh, I didn't think I would want that. Or let's say you're in a calorie deficit phase and you're like, yeah, I know I can't have that and have a successful like day to decrease body fat. And you're feeling really tempted in the moment. Generally, all you got to do right then is just do the math for it. And so then it's like, okay, I want this food. And then if you don't know off the top of your head, because maybe you just haven't learned how to estimate macros yet, you can just look it up. Just look up how many macros and calories that food is. Okay, I see that cupcake that's staring at me is 250 calories, and let's say it is like 50 carbs. Okay, so now I have that. Then I can decide like, okay, if I eat that right now, that is going to put me over my daily target by 250 calories. Now I can either decide, okay, I'm in a lifestyle phase, I want to enjoy that, then I'm gonna reduce that from later because I still have food left, and I'll just know I'm gonna be hungry later, right? That's the sacrifice I'm willing to take. Or if I'm in a deficit phase, it may be, okay, if I have that, then I'm not going to create my deficit today. And if I don't create my deficit today, I'm not gonna decrease that 0.2 pounds today. And then likely if you don't create the deficit today, then tomorrow your body has to work through that. So typically it's like a 0.5 pound like that you would be sacrificing. So then it's just deciding like, okay, do I want to decrease a half a pound or do I want this food? Typically, when you think about it like that, it becomes less like this vague thing and more very black and white of just a simple decision. And then once you have the decision and you're solid in your decision, then it just the chatter stops because you're not even negotiating with it anymore. You can do the same thing. Like if you're wanting to buy a purse, but you're like, okay, I could easily do the math and no, I can't afford that $10,000 Birkin. I don't even know how much they are. It may be a lot more than that. Then it's very simple. The desire goes away because you're like, yeah, I do not want to do that. That does not feel good at all. Then the desire goes away. So it's the same thing because generally if you are good with your financials, which everyone listening to my podcast generally is, then you're going to be super good with your nutrition once you learn it in those terms. All right. In the last one, number 5, I'm eating high quality food, but my portions in my macros are off. Okay, generally the mistake here is twofold. One, the same thing that we've been talking about before, where you're just not planning ahead because then in the moment you ran out of food or you're swapping the food out for something else, or you're just hungry in the moment and you're like, I can't be bothered doing like macro math right now. I'm just going to eat this, which again, doesn't happen if you have your structure and your initial like daily structure in place where you've taken your macros and spread them out over your day and then know how to create your plate and then know how to estimate those portions. These are all things that I teach in Create Your Shape. So these are all like intentional solutions and why I have them in the program, but that's the reason why this happens. The other reason why this happens is because you're still focused on thinking like, oh, eating clean, as long as I eat okay and like eating whole foods or real foods, then I'm good, right? But changing your shape is a numbers game. So building muscle, decreasing body fat, it comes down to quantity. It's not as much about quality. So meaning quantity, meaning the amount of food. It's not as much as am I eating healthy or not. So when you kind of learn the math behind it and learn the math and science of like how actually changing your shape happens, then you care a little bit more about the quantity and less just about generally eating healthy. And so then your actions and your priorities shift to that. So again, I think education and understanding it is really what I've seen for myself in my ladies, the biggest game changer that then determines their actions, because then they're very clear on what they need to do and why, and they actually have like reason behind it, and they're much more convicted in creating those actions and those habits, because then they don't feel like I just need to do more and more and more of all this random stuff. They're like, oh, I'm only going to do what actually matters. So these are the 5 macro mistakes I typically see. Which ones are you currently making? And then what is the solution that you can start implementing this week? And if you're like, yeah, I just need more of the education, I need more of the understanding, then definitely keep listening to this podcast and or join us in Create Your Shape, where you can learn this in much more detail and get a custom macro plan that is specific to you and your goals. All right, I'll see you next week in the Create Your Shape podcast.